Good day, everyone. This is Yolandi from the Bible in 1 Year, and today we are spending time in Numbers chapter 30, a chapter about the keeping of vows. As I've read through the chapter, one of the key messages to me was how serious God views the words that we speak. And it reminds me that our promises and our commitments and even casual statements reflect our integrity. God desires honesty and faithfulness in every area of our lives, and He expects us to mean what we say and follow through on what we have committed to. This passage challenges us to speak thoughtfully, make promises carefully, and live as people whose words can be trusted. The chapter starts in verse 2 with the core message of this entire chapter when we read: If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself with a pledge of abstinence, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. It is important to notice that the passage begins with the word if. This shows that making a vow or swearing an oath was optional and not compulsory. God never intended to burden people with promises they were not prepared to keep. However, once a vow was made, God expected it to be honored. This reminds us to be thoughtful before making commitments and to faithfully keep the promises we choose to make. In Matthew 5, verses 33 to 37, Jesus builds on this same principle by emphasizing the importance of integrity in our words. He teaches that our honesty should be so consistent that there is no need to reinforce our statements with vows or oaths. Instead, our yes should simply mean yes, and our no should simply mean no, reflecting a life of truthfulness and trustworthiness. Verses 3 to 5 address vows made by a young unmarried woman who still lived under her father's roof. These vows were subject to her father's approval, giving him the authority to confirm or nullify them. In the cultural context of the time, where women often had limited legal and social standing, this provision also served as a measure of protection. It ensured that a young woman would not be bound by a rash or unwise commitment, while placing the responsibility on the head of the household to exercise wisdom and discernment in safeguarding her well being. In verses 6 to 8, and again in verses 10 to 16, we see that the responsibility to confirm or nullify a woman's vows passed from the father to the husband when she married. There is an important distinction between these two sections. Verses 6 to 8 deal with the vows a woman had made before entering marriage, and therefore brought with her into that new relationship, while verses 10 to 16 address vows made during her married life. In both cases, the husband was entrusted with the responsibility to exercise wisdom and discernment, ensuring that his wife would not remain bound by commitments that could bring unnecessary hardship or harm. This highlights both the husband's role in lovingly leading and protecting his household and God's concern for the well being of the family. Verse 9, right in the middle of these two passages, where a woman enjoyed the protection of her husband, highlights a significant change in responsibility. Because unlike an unmarried woman living under her father's authority, or a married woman whose husband could annul certain vows, a widow or a divorced woman stood on her own before God regarding the commitments she made. Since no one could release her from a rash vow, she needed to carefully consider her words before speaking. And the lesson we could take from this is that we should avoid making impulsive promises that we may regret later on in life. Because at the end of the day, each of us is ultimately accountable to God for our own words and commitments. With great freedom comes great responsibility. So may we choose to exercise wisdom and responsibility in all we do, proving ourselves to be faithful stewards who accurately reflect the values and character of God's kingdom. May you have a blessed day. Goodbye.